Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight, our back to school webinar. We're very excited about it. And I actually wanted to give you some introductions to our panel of experts. Okay, so. All right, here we go. Okay, so first of all, we are extremely excited to have Dr. Wendy Ross with us tonight. We'd like to thank her for putting together this webinar and supporting our efforts. She is a developmental and behavior pediatrician. Currently, she's the inaugural director of Jefferson Center for Autism and Neurodiversity, which merges her love of clinical medicine with her community inclusion programs. She previously directed the Center for Pediatric Development, where she assessed and developed plans for patients with a wide range of developmental and behavioral differences. She also founded the Autism Inclusion Resources, a nonprofit that's aimed at enabling individuals affected by autism and related disabilities to more fully participate in our world. Dr. Ross created the first ever autism airport inclusion program and has brought this program to airports across the United States. She is in the top 10 CNN heroes for her work, and her work has been endorsed by the Academy of Pediatrics, the Society for Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics, and the Department of Transportation. So again, we'd like to thank her for putting this presentation together for us and for her support of all of our efforts. We also have from TheraPlay, we have Katie Marino, Courtney Klinger, and Gabby. Katie is an associate director as well as Courtney, but Katie is also a physical therapist, and Courtney is a speech language pathologist, and Gabby is an ABA therapist. We also, from our sister companies down in Virginia, have two people with us tonight on our our panel of experts. Faith, and you don't see the picture for Crystal, but she is with us. They're both ABA therapists, and they work in the Virginia area with our families in need of services there. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Wendy to get started. Please, if you have any questions, just send them on in and we'll address them as we can. All right, thanks, Wendy.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. First of all, I want to point out that I'm wearing my superhero t-shirt because I just feel like individuals in the therapy field are really heroes because they're so good at seeing the potential in people and bringing out the best in them. So I'm really grateful to be here today to talk to you. And can you just go to the next slide, Lori? So today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and the challenges, and maybe it depends on your child, maybe the benefits, but this has obviously been a hugely challenging time and something that, I mean, unless you're over 100 years old, have not lived through. So, on the one hand, the changes in routine can lead to big behavioral meltdowns. And sometimes the kids have problems too. No, I'm just kidding. For the children. And executive functioning is sort of our ability to organize ourselves, to get in the mindset that we're going to work or learn and not be sort of in free time. And that's really much harder when we're not in a different setting than where we do our relaxation. So that's a huge shift in how we get organized, both mentally and physically. Attentional problems make Zoom learning super hard, because we're just in front of a screen and we get less feedback from that. And people can't give us other kinds of cues to keep us on task the same way they can do in person. And we're all getting a lot less movement, right? Like I know I have to change my seating a few times just to keep my back and my core activated. It helps me pay attention, and it helps me from getting lower back pain. Because, you know, normally at work or at school, like we're walking to the bus, we're getting off the bus, we're walking down the hall. So there's all these built-in movement breaks that we just simply do not have when we're in a home learning setting. So another issue that seems to have come up is just sort of increased access to food. And many of us, you know, of course we eat for survival, but many of us eat because maybe we're bored, or maybe we're sad, or maybe we're tired, or you know, so having increased access to food can be a huge issue as well. So these are just some of the many challenges that kids and parents are facing. And next slide. And that's for the kids, but also like parents are having trouble working, right? And there's no break of everybody sort of having time away from each other. I mean, even if you have a really large house, it's really not the same as having a different environment with different people around you. A lot of parents are rightfully terrified about the risk of regression if their children are not. So, you know, they're sort of making progress, and then there's also losing the gains that you've made, right? Because these things are not being reinforced in a classroom setting with peers and with teachers. I mean, I find personally, it's also really hard for me to hold the same expectations of my own children that other people can have. My children tend to be like better behaved for other people. I'm sure that's like, and they kind of let all their fears and worries sort of hang out because they feel safe with us as parents, right? So it's harder for them to stay in that zone, right? There's this zone of comfort, which is kind of nice because we're cozy and we feel safe, but we're not really learning, right? We're not growing. And then there's like this little space of uncomfortable where it's sort of like the good kind of uncomfort that makes us stretch. And then there's like this other place where we exceed our uncomfortable level and we're sort of overwhelmed. So we really, when we learn and grow, we want to kind of be in that middle zone, kind of like the middle of the Oreo where the cream is. So it's really harder to do that when you're in your safe place at home with your safest people. It's also harder to be predictable during this time. I mean, I personally had been hoping that things would be a little better organized by now, but I think there have been a lot of issues. First of all, no one knew what to expect by the fall. I think most of us thought things might have calmed down. There were a lot of conflicting messages between what the politicians were saying and what the scientists were saying, which really kind of led to conflict that was not productive because we couldn't make decisions that made sense. The schools really couldn't plan as effectively as they might have because, you know, what was considered to be a green zone or yellow zone maybe wasn't really reflecting the true safety of the situation. So there's been just so much confusion and uncertainty. Another issue that's come up is sort of the sensory challenges of wearing a mask. I want to mention that on the Jefferson Center for Autism and Neurodiversity website, we have a video about wearing masks and even making your own masks as a project. That's really good for getting in buy-in and doing different things. So it might not have to be wrapped around your ears. Maybe it can be pulled over your head, different things. So there's a bunch of strategies there. And also a lot of these strategies are also listed there in a handout form. One of the things we all need to be really careful of is when you do not have a set schedule, like it's not like you have to catch a bus at a certain time, it's easy to let things slip. And I'm going to tell you something really bizarre about the sleep-wake cycle is it's controlled by when was the last time we slept. Of course, that makes sense, but it's also controlled by your exposure to light and activity. So if our activities are kind of not held in place, even though the day only has 24 hours in it, our schedules, our inner time clocks have 25 hours. So if we were left in darkness with no visual cues or activities, we would automatically go to bed an hour later and wake up an hour later. So it's really important to hold some of those boundaries so that it's not, things don't slide, so that kids are staying up later and later and then waking up later and then end up getting more of their sleep during the daytime than the nighttime, because that's super complicated for so many reasons. Okay, next slide. So I want to say specifically for some people with autism or really more specifically social anxiety, this period of distance of being online instead of in person is actually has and sort of on the down low about this, but they've been doing better actually. They have less social anxiety because they don't actually have to be in the same room with people. They don't necessarily have to wear, more formal clothing because as this has progressed, people went from like dressing in business casual to wearing something business casual on top to sort of go into the superhero t-shirt. So that can be like a sensory relief. And there's just a lot less environments and transitions. And so for some individuals who really have a lot of social anxiety or sensory issues, they might find themselves being a little bit more productive during this time. And what we need to think about that, especially for kids who maybe are in middle school, or if you find that you're in this category where your kid is doing better and learning better and so much less anxious, you need to think about why is that? And what aspects of this, when we do go back to school, what aspects were benefiting them and how can you balance out some of those things? Like, this is telling you that maybe your kid is getting bullied in school and you didn't know, and so they're learning from home and that stress is off. So this is where, and I think we have a whole team here that's going to be part of the discussion later, but when we look at kids' behaviors, they're really a form of communication. So if behavior has shifted dramatically for the positive, you need to know why that is. You need to look at the function of that behavior and try to see what aspects of it are helping. And if the behaviors, of course, have shifted, to the negative because of a bunch of those challenges I spoke about, then I think, we need to really look at which particular challenge has been the worst or the hardest for your family or your child. Is it that their sleep is slipping and then they're overtired and people are frustrated? Is it that they don't have a designated space to do their work and their executive functioning has fallen apart? Is it that they need a schedule? Or is it all of these things, And we're going to talk about some of these strategies, but sometimes really the first step is sort of understanding what behavior is telling you. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we talked about all the problems, we talked about some potential benefits, and now we'll talk about some strategies. So one thing is visual stories or social stories that were created by Carol Gray can be super helpful. I know many of the therapists at TheraPlay are very good at writing these stories, so you might be able to ask your therapist to help you with one if you need one for a specific event or even just about a general situation. If you need one for COVID or about returning to school with COVID, you can find one where you can fill in your own details on our website at Jefferson Center for Autism and Neurodiversity. But these stories can really explain, what is COVID? Why do we need to be 6 feet apart? I think understanding a lot of those details can be super helpful depending on the cognitive level of your child and help them understand.
And Wendy, I just wanted to add in there so that everyone knows, one of the handouts that we have is the social story that that you had created. So we actually made that into a handout for the families as well.
Oh, great. Thank you. Another strategy that I would recommend is sort of minimizing some of the media coverage about it. And this was, really much worse a few months ago, but there's still, now the news cycle has kind of moved on to the election, which you might also want to avoid just because it's a stressful topic for many. But I think the media coverage for a while was really fixated every day on the number of people who were dying, the number of people who are getting sick, and that just ratchets up everybody's anxiety. And even our kids, if they seem like they're not attending to us, frequently can pick up on our vibe. So of course you don't want them to directly see a lot of this media, but you also don't want to underestimate its impact on you and the kind of energy that you're giving out, exuding. It's hard right now. You want to be really careful about promising a timeline for what's going to happen. As parents, we know, especially for our kids that are rigid, a timeline can really be helpful. The problem is, like, the world in the past 100 years, this is the first time we've been in this situation, and there's a lot of miscommunication about real data and what's happening and what we should do, a lot of mixed messages. So even under the best of circumstances, which that is not, there's really no timeline. So the problem is if you say, kind of casually, well, in a few days, don't be surprised if your child's like, okay, it's been a few days. What's the situation, mom or dad? So you want to be clear that we don't know, and that, periodically they can check in. But for kids that are rigid, you want to be really careful about overpromising. You also really want to focus on, flexibility, because this is a time where things change every day. Like, I know in our school district, the plan changes every other day. It's gotten to the point where I'm just waiting till they say we're going back to school tomorrow, because by the time you understand the plan, they're on to the next plan. And I'm not judging them, because these are just such complicated times, but you just have to be really flexible. And I suspect that when flu season comes in and when winter comes in and people are spending a lot less time outside and are together a lot more, we're going to find increases that might lead to further shutdowns, sadly. So you really want to do a lot of talking about the idea of flexibility. And I don't know if that's one of the stories that Lori copied, but it's on our website if you want to see that. I think it's really important to talk about that. We talked about the sleep-wake cycles. I cannot overemphasize the importance of movement and exercise. And by this, I mean for like your entire family, because no one's getting the same amount of movement and exercise as they were, because there was just a lot of movement and exercise just by nature of being at work and school. Like, even going to the bathroom, you had to take X number of steps, versus probably in your house, it's like 5 or 6, depending, how big your house is. So it's really important. And I would even furthermore go further and say that it's really beneficial to do that first thing in the morning, because exercise and movement, it increases your endorphins, it provides you with more focus, it reduces anxiety, and it makes it easier to sit. So I would really recommend any kind of getting up, getting that energy out, and then starting with your day. And furthermore, I would suggest movement breaks throughout the day, just to sort of reset. Like, do not underestimate the power, the positive power of movement and exercise just on everyone. Mindfulness is another really great strategy. I'm not gonna lie, I have never been myself great at meditating, so total transparency. But even if that is just literally taking a few deep breaths a few times a day, like even I can do that. And one of the things that we recommend is sort of taking your finger and doing like a figure 8. Do you know what I'm talking about? So weird, this is coming out backwards on my screen. But anyway, so you can like take a breath in, and then as you come back around, take a breath out, And so sometimes doing something like that, even if it's just like 5 or 6 breaths, can kind of center us and put us in a place of more calm and focus. When we're stressed out or upset or sad, or I have found, and many others have suggested, that helping other people really will take your mind off your own issues, and it makes you feel good. I mean, most of us, right? So at a time like this, what can you do? It's not like you can be running around. So, checking on neighbors via Zoom, or, checking on other family members via Zoom, or phone calling people, or making cards for people, being creative. Those are things, or even cooking for people, as long as you're not like, dipping your fingers in the cookie batter or something, can all really be helpful ways. Writing letters to our troops, or for a while there were a lot of people writing letters to people in elder homes or nursing homes, because they weren't unable to be visited by their families. So sometimes things like that can really help others and also help ourselves at the same time. We talked about flexibility. I think living in gratitude is a big one. And I think when we're all stressed out, we're worried, or especially with all the uncertainty, it's easy to get caught up in that. But there's no reason that even in the worst of times, we can't, come together as a family and, let's say, think of 3 things that we're grateful for. I mean, many of us do this around Thanksgiving. I try to practice this, actually, I do like every day probably. And sometimes if I'm having a bad day, it's things just as simple as I have food, it's the sun is out, and my sons are healthy. Really, it doesn't have to be big fancy things like I have $1 million, or but usually I set the bar at 3, and I find that I can get to like 5 to 10 at least, even on my worst day. There's a saying that happiness is what we get when things are going our way, but joy is the place we inhabit when we sort of focus on what we have, and regardless of what we want. So it's just sort of living in a place of gratitude. And then executive functioning is super, super important for getting work done and being productive. One of the things I want to say is that what we saw in the heat, like in March, in the heat of this thing in March and April, when things were totally crazy and nobody knew what was happening, like at least now we have more of a sense, is, kids were suddenly home. We were unprepared. Parents were suddenly home. And there's this sense as a parent that if you're not as productive as you maybe were in the office, which can happen because you're being interrupted and trying to teach your children, right? And you're getting snacks and whatever, then we tend to have the sense that like, oh, we're just going to work more. And I really want to discourage that, because you actually can't make up for being less productive by just working more. Because what happens is you just end up building more breaks. It just kind of snowballs, right? Just kind of escalates. And the problem is that then we work, when we shouldn't be. Like the lines between work and home time are blurred, right? So then when we should be spending quality time with our kids, we're not, because we're trying to catch up, which makes us harried and snippy. And then what happens is our kids don't have our attention, so they escalate whatever behaviors they have to get our attention. And then that'll happen during the day, so then we're less productive, then we try to work later. So you really need to sort of protect your time and map out a strategy for yourself as well as for your child, so that they are getting a certain amount of your undivided attention, so that they're not trying to seek it all day long. And you need to understand that things are different. They're different for everybody, and your productivity just may be a little different, and but you're not alone. So executive functioning is about, having the right materials in the right place, setting the ambiance, the mood, like you would for a good date or something. So, but this is for working. So you want to make sure that your child has a place to sit, that they have a seat where they're engaging their core, that'll help them focus. Even those really big exercise balls can be cool for that. And hopefully some of our therapists will speak more to that later. If they do need any sensory stuff, like fidgets, you want to make sure they have that. And, what some families are doing is, I have a couple of my families that have actually, their kids were in 2 separate rooms, but what they did was they put their kids in one bedroom, and then they made the other bedroom kind of like a little office for the kids where they have their desks. And, so that's it's sort of a separate place where they know when they go in there, they're going to do work. And that can be super helpful. Okay, next slide.
And Wendy, I just wanted to add a couple things to that too, that
Sure.
you're making. So just so that everyone knows as well, with the movement and exercise, if anyone's looking for ideas, we actually, if you look on YouTube for TheraPlay, we have some yoga videos that are geared towards kids that are just like 10, 15-minute little videos. Some are surrounding a story that might be helpful if you're looking for those types of activities. And then just personally, to combine the helping others and, as Wendy said, the importance of movement and exercise, there's a ton of virtual walks out there for really good causes, and we've actually done a few where they actually will send you like a cool T-shirt, and it's kind of like to get your family involved in something like that. Is a fun activity, gets you exercise, and you're also feeling good because you're helping an organization that you care about. So just those two other things, and then.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Lori. I know a friend of mine signed me up for one of those, and not only do you get cool swag like a t-shirt, but you get sort of like a medal, like what you do for completing a race. And the nice thing about that is if it's like a 5K, if you can't do 5K at once, you can divide it up. You can do 2.5 and then 2.5 and still feel accomplished and like you've benefited a charity. That's such a great idea. Okay. Okay, so here's just some stuff about masks, making your own. If your child has a hard time, you might want to sort of get them incrementally. You know, like let's do it for 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 20 minutes, then an increase. And you want to keep in mind, you know, we kind of have to balance sort of staying alive with living. So if you are going to be picking your battles, so to speak, the data really doesn't support, like if you're going for a walk and you're going with your child, let's say, and no one else is within 6 feet of you and you're outside, it's probably pretty safe not to wear a mask. I mean, if people come up to you, you want to have a mask with you so you can cover up. But I think if you're going for a walk and there's nobody around and you're just outside, what the data supports is that that's okay. If you're going to go to a store or see somebody else, you want to have a mask with you to put it on. But that's probably not a time to force a mask because it's really not doing that, you know, if nobody else is around. But if people are around, those are the times when you want to make sure the mask is worn. And then, you know, we talked about the social stories and, you know, for those children who have speech and language issues, they do sell masks. And I believe I saw these at Fun and Function. It is really important for you and the child. They might need to see your mouth when you're speaking. So there are masks where they have kind of like a window where it's covered with like a different material, but you can just see the movement of the mouth because if kids are learning how to do that, and hopefully the therapist will talk more about this later, that might be the kind of mask that you want to invest in both for yourself so they can see how you're forming words, but also for them. So next. So you want to also like, please get help. And this is another like risk benefit ratio. So as this is sort of unfolded, a lot of us have been sort of forming sort of isolation bubbles, right? So there's the people in your house, but like my mom, for example, lives alone. So now she's a little bit older, so we want to be really careful, but we co-isolate with her. And, you know, with some other close family that we know are being responsible, that are hand sanitizing when they're out, that are washing their hands regularly, and most importantly, wearing masks. So if you're with people or if you have a small cohort, and some people are even co-isolating with some neighbors, and they're setting up sort of school programs. So on like Mondays and Tuesdays, the kids will go to this neighbor's house for school, and on 2 other days they'll go to the other house, and they know that those people are keeping the same safety standards that they are, so the risk of getting sick is low, but the benefits of having space to work without your kids in the house. What we're starting to see is that domestic violence and child abuse cases are rising. People are very, very overwhelmed and frustrated. People are losing their jobs and super stressed. So if you do have somebody that can help you, please consider that, because things like depression or lashing out unexpectedly when you didn't know that, even if you weren't the person you would have expected to do that under a lot of duress, things might change. It's much better to have help, especially if it's somebody that you know is pretty safe, than to risk something like, some other kinds of morbidity or mortality from that. This might be interesting for our moms out there. It might also apply to our dads, but I'm going to be honest, the data was of moms. They studied moms. Mothers of children with autism have been shown to have as much stress as soldiers in combat. And I want to be clear that this was not just like they asked the moms, like, how stressed out are you? They actually compared this to soldiers by using cortisol, which is a hormone secreted when we're anxious or stressed. And the cortisol levels, as well as the subjective data or what people said. So that's like a heck of a lot of stress, and that was before COVID. So you can imagine where we're all out now. So please take an inventory of yourself, know where you're at, and get help if you need it. There's a lot of concerns about learning, like I said, not only making progress, but about regression. And a lot of our kids get some of their therapies through their IEPs at the school, and they are not getting those services. And that's why it's so great. And that's why I'm a big TheraPlay fan, and I'm not getting paid for this talk or anything, so I have no conflict of interest, just to be totally clear. But it's really great to have places like TheraPlay with really great therapists where you can ask your physicians to write you prescriptions to try to make up for some of those services that you may have lost, and whether that be provided virtually, or I've spoken with Lori about how the centers are being kept clean and what kind of protocols they're using, or in person. That's really a great way to make up for some of the services in real time, because I don't know honestly how the schools are going to be able physically to provide compensatory services. I mean, people were owed compensatory services from the school district even before COVID. So now, it's just going to be really, really overwhelming. So, especially if you're in Pennsylvania and have MA, and I think it's Keystone Mercy, where it will cover it and there's not a capitation on the services, I would try to take advantage of that. Okay, well, we talked a little bit about, getting help in terms of the mental health of the family, and getting help also can reintroduce structure and movement and can enable parents to work, which would be a huge stress reliever. And so, yeah, we talked about if you're socially isolating with someone else. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the issues that kids are having on a more specific level with executive functioning. If your child can sort of start a task, but then get distracted and not finish it, or they have trouble getting the things they need, or changes in routine, or if they're getting frustrated and getting upset and giving up because they don't have somebody near them supporting them, or some of the issues is having difficulty estimating the time or allowing the right amount of time to do an assignment, or even struggling just organizing materials. So these are all things that, and I'm hoping the therapist can address some of these strategies, but some of the things that you can do are to put visual schedules or checklists. And at first it might be you kind of have to create that checklist with the child and support them as they go through it. And then the expectation would be that they do it more and more independently. But there are a lot of strategies that you kind of want to use to keep people on task and making sure that they have what they need to get things done. Okay, next. Also, don't underestimate just your praise. When they are doing something right, it's always really important to catch kids doing a positive behavior. Too often, like, we never forget to sort of scold or snap at our kid when they do something wrong, but sometimes we forget to praise them for the positive things. And I don't mean like bogus praise, because kids are onto that. I mean really for specific things, like, I love the way you sat down and took that whole class, or the way you did that homework assignment, because these are the steps that you took. So the more specific the praise is, the better. So keeping an organized space for work, it's really important to think about your chair. It's interesting because even a chair just with arms for kids that have low tone can be huge in sort of helping them engage their core and not fall out of their chair. Something that helps them. There's these cushions, proprioceptive cushions, that help kids kind of balance out without doing some big rocking that's going to give somebody else vertigo, right? You want to think about if they're having neck pain or headaches, putting stretches into their day. So these are some of the things that you need to sort of work on. I think we're done with that slide. Was that not my slide? I don't know. Oh no, this was. Okay, so and this is a little bit late. We had talked about doing this slide before, but if there is a new school, like if your child's aging up from elementary to middle school, the more you can do to sort of prepare them online with pictures or videos or introducing the teachers is really important, especially if they're going to the new school year, or even if they're going from virtual to in life school, and you know, the masks in school, and talking about flexibility. So we talked about a lot of this. And some kids, because they've been out of real school for like 6 or 7 months already, that's a huge gap. Like a lot of us know that our kids, even just over the summer, it's hard for them to reacclimate. But in this type of a situation, your child may at some point need to have their current educational levels reassessed to find out where they're actually starting from. So, and also, you know, this was more from like transitioning from the summer to the school year. You really want, if sleep-wake cycles has switched, and even now it's really important going from the weekday to the weekend to make sure that wake-up times kind of stay the same. Otherwise, it's like having jet lag every week. Okay. Yeah, so I just want to talk about, you know, special education, like early intervention is home-based. Some therapists are going to the home, some are trying to do it virtually. The school district owes you a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Being at home is kind of a little too least restrictive. So you want to just be aware of what you're entitled to. If your child just gets accommodations in a 504, you want to be aware of that. And like I said, it might be physically impossible to make up in compensatory services through the school district. So looking for alternatives, like seeing if you can make things up with outpatient therapy where, you know, and I know there's ABA offered, there's OT, PT, speech, like all of those things can be super helpful. So again, you know, when we talk about, you know, when you do go back, and again, I almost hesitate to sort of talk too much about this slide because, you know, there is an IEP, it's a legal document, you have a lot of rights. What worries me is that the schools are going to be so overwhelmed as we do finally go back in. So where you can, again, I would see what services you can get for your child in real time. Next slide. Yes, so we talked about getting services in other ways and combining bubbles where possible. Okay, next slide. And I think, well, we talked a little bit about this. I think this was one of the therapists going to speak about this, Lori, in more detail, or?
Yes, and I think Katie and Courtney, we're going to jump in now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I am Courtney. I'm a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Katie. I'm a physical therapist.
So Dr. Ross had hit on a lot of the wonderful ideas that we share with families to kind of help them during this definitely challenging time for all of you. So Dr. Ross explained what executive functioning is and a lot of what these things are. So Katie and I are going to give you some tips and tricks to kind of implement some of these things to help your children. So Dr. Ross talked about visual schedules, written schedules. Hopefully a lot of the teachers have implemented some type of visual written schedule to kind of know how much time is being spent on every activity or every subject that the child is addressing. If you need some support with that, I would certainly reach out to their teachers to kind of make sure that you know the routine of the day to help your child set up for success. It might just be a written schedule where you write out, you know, it's art first, then it's math, and you're writing them off and they can check it off. Or they can do a checkbox. You might have to come up with some pictures, and you can just go in Word and create little pictures of an image that shows the child is doing math. And it might just be, you know, numbers to kind of indicate the child is doing math. Also within that too, you might need to set a timer. So if you know that math time is going to be, I don't know, 30 minutes long, you can set a timer right next to that computer for your child so that they can see on the timer what the expectation is for the time. as Dr. Ross talked about some of those, organizing that space, it's hard. I love the idea of what one of her families did with the rooms for the kids, but definitely having an organized space. I know just me working at home, I really had to find how I needed to adjust the height of my computer. I had such neck, but from seeing kids on the computer, I had such neck pain in the back, and that was just, was causing stress on my vision. So really looking at like the height of the computer and where that's at. Dr. Ross talked about the seating, and Katie will talk a little bit about that as well with some of the core strength. But just looking at some of those things, making sure pens and pencils are available, papers available, crayons, markers, all those different tools that your child might need are available and they're organized. And then one thing we often don't think about when we think about executive function, it's not just the space, but it's really also how the child organizes their thought process and how they're thinking. So think about as you're listening into the teacher's lesson, any memory strategies you can give your child. Might you need to help them create like a graphic organizer, or maybe just written cues, or help them teach them how to take notes. They're not seeing that model from the teacher, right in person. So just next to them, showing them how to take notes, so that they can see that model of how you're taking notes and they can organize that paperwork for them. And then as a speech therapist, I have to also think about communication. Like, these kids are expected in some situations probably to be quiet for a long period of time, and our kids like to communicate. So giving them the opportunity to speak up, and even those kids that may have communication challenges, we're on the computer and the child might have to respond in a little bit of a quicker time. So allowing that child time to process and think about what they need to say, or process the instructions the teacher's giving. Make sure you communicate with the teachers. It's definitely a hard time for them as well, and this is all new. And I'm sure most of the teachers are appreciative for any feedback you can give, to let you know that, Tommy might need another second to process. So I just wanted to kind of let you know, and be there to help support your child as much as you can, to give them those instructions. Slower, give different words so that they can process that language a little differently. And then Dr. Ross talked a lot about the movement that your child might need, putting them on a ball, and Katie can speak to that a little bit more as a physical therapist, but making sure we have those structured movement times for the child. Okay.
Alrighty. So, and even just going into like some of like the visual challenges that your child can face. So again, I know being in front of a screen all day, I mean, yes, we had electronics, there's video games, there's tablets, there's this and that, but now that was a break for them, now they're sitting in front of a screen all day. So headaches are extremely common just from that. Plus, now they're having to go, and depending on the age of the child, they're looking at the computer screen and maybe they're trying to take notes, or maybe, everything is on the computer versus other programs where some of it's on the computer and the rest of it is where they're doing worksheets and projects and stuff that they were doing in typical school. So again, trying to have that balance and even communicating with the teachers, because again, like Courtney said, this is incredibly new to them and it's new to us as parents. I mean, I'm going through it with my own kids and it is exhausting because I have to then learn it so I can teach him. So when we're sitting there both staring at the screen all day, it's a lot. So I mean, like, there's like the blue light glasses that you can get to try to help, and there's all sorts of cool designs and stuff like that, which the kids love. But again, like making sure to take advantage of those breaks. Like they do build in breaks, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous school, and getting them up to move. They shouldn't really be going from being on Zoom to being on a video game, because that really doesn't give their eyes and their brain a break from the screen. So having something structured, whether it's, okay, we're going to go out in the yard and we're going to do animal walks. We're going to play a game of kickball. We're going to, do whichever, because I know some of the programs have gym classes, which are still, again, here, go do some activity, whether having walks. The other day we created a scavenger hunt outside and I hid a bunch of stuff outside and my kids had to run around and find it. It was something fun, but something that got them out for like 15, 20 minutes. They got to get their energy out and then come back in. And just thinking of like core strengths for these kids. So again, when they were in typical school, they would do an activity for maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Then they're up moving around. They're walking down the hallways. They're walking to lunch, going to the library, having recess. So when they're sitting, and again, I think we've just with all of these challenges, the kids for a while there weren't going outside. And then we had summertime and hopefully more kids were going out, but there were no sports. There was no activities that could be done to keep these kids moving. So now if you take a child who already was a little bit weaker, maybe has some low muscle tone, so they tend to have to already work harder, and have now possibly put on weight from being inside and doing a lot of board eating. And, you know, my kids do all the time. They raid the fridge and then, okay, well, now you just ate 3 meals and you didn't really need to. So again, like making sure that there's even schedules for that, for eating. Okay, this is breakfast time, this is snack time, this is lunch time. Because again, with that lack of a schedule, it makes it hard because kids they crave structure and they do better with it. And it's hard on parents who are trying to work and do that at the same time, but the more positive results will definitely come from that. So other ways that you can have, that you can work on core strength, like Courtney mentioned, sitting on a ball. You can get a therapy ball that's the right size for your child. And what you really want to look for is that they're able to keep that 90-degree position. So they should be able to sit on the floor and have their knees bent and have their feet flat on the floor. They should not be up on their toes. They shouldn't really be, you know, falling all over. It should be nice and even. And you can get the smaller ones. I know like Target has them. You can order all different sizes. So typically it's like a 45 centimeter diameter ball. But also, again, like, and then you can utilize that. So for a child who's got maybe sensory seeking behaviors, having them sit on that ball, they can be bouncing on the ball, and what may be distracting to you is exactly what they need to regulate themselves. And not that they need to sit on that ball all day, but it could be, all right, we're doing social studies, and I know social studies is something he or she enjoys, so they're going to focus on that. Get out that ball and let them get that input there. There's sit discs that can be used where they're just a little small disc where it's just a little bit squishy that they can sit on. I have a lot of, like, my son has ADHD, so we do a lot of putty play. So while we're sitting there learning the lesson, he's got putty in one hand, so he can then focus and not be climbing, you know, falling all out of his seat. And half the time, I mean, I've never met a kid who falls out of his seat more than my son. So all of those things. And again, even if you have a child with, like I said, we talked about low tone, which tends to be a lot more, and I don't mean to use the word floppy, but like they're the kids that just have to, they work harder. You can just see that their muscles don't contract the same way that a typical a child with typical muscle tone does. But then you can also have that kid with high muscle tone. And so to kind of give an example, like, so a child with cerebral palsy who may be more rigid, and the less that they move, the tighter that they get. So again, just understanding the importance of having stretch breaks, having movement breaks, and depending on the need of your child. And again, whether you're working with your teacher, the therapist, or you just know that what they need, it's just important to build that into the time that you're working on school and even on the weekends, because again, that routine and consistency definitely helps with that.
I think we're good.
Alrighty. So then as far as services that are offered and available, so you've got occupational therapy, which, you know, we kind of generalize it as like, so being a physical therapist, I work on the big movements. I work on the gross motor skills. So you're running, jumping, all of your bigger movements, whereas the occupational therapist, their main thing is function. And honestly, what's a kid's main function? Their job is to play. Their job is to play, to go to school. So they will work on the more fine-tuned things. So like handwriting, how do they hold a pencil? You know, eating, can they hold a fork appropriately? You know, and they're huge with the emotional regulation and the sensory processing and even just vestibular and visual parts of therapy. So really, I mean, physical and occupational therapy work so closely together, and we very much do overlap. They just are trained a little bit more in the fine motor tasks than we get the gross motor tasks in PT.
Mm-hmm. And then as a speech language pathologist and speech therapy services, you're going to work a lot on that communication. Everybody thinks of communication just as the expressive language we use, the words we use, but it's also that receptive language, which is that ability to understand the language that is presented to you. Right now, Katie and I are talking to you, and Dr. Ross has talked to you, and for you to understand that information we're presenting, That's your receptive language skills. It's your processing skills. As children are having a lot of verbal instruction right now, and the teachers are doing a phenomenal job of giving some visual supports too, you might start to find that your child does have a hard time with just some of that verbal instruction. And so a speech therapist, and our services, we have speech therapy services, can help you and your child be able to process that. In addition to that, we work on the articulation skills, making sure the sounds are clear, making sure if they're speaking to another child or an adult, they can understand them. So looking at those individual sounds, we can also support that executive functioning skills that we kind of talked about. What can we use to help that child process and organize the language and the information? We can also help support that as well. And then Gabby is going to talk about the behavioral therapy services.
Yes, hi. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst, and behavior services, a lot of times people think that it is primarily eliminating some challenging behaviors. What a lot of people don't recognize too, ABA services also increase those appropriate behaviors. And that's what ABA is going to do. It's going to help your child really increase those positive things, appropriate ways of getting whatever their function is. I know Dr. Ross spoke about identifying the function of the behavior, and that's really what ABA does, is why is your child doing this, and how can we find a more appropriate way to get them what they're really needing. And part of that too is increasing their motivation. So a lot of times, especially right now, you know, working with your BSC or your BCBA, it could be very important, because you might be seeing behaviors now at home or during hybrid school that you've never seen before and never had to deal with before. So whereas you might have a behavior plan that worked for the school, it might not work right now for you at home. And it's important to be in communication with those people to really change a behavior plan, get some of those tips and strategies that you can use at home, and using all those visuals that everyone keeps on mentioning, and that consistency as much as possible, and being able to, you know, work through challenging behaviors, and also recognizing that we're going to have bad days. Our kids are also going to have bad days, and that's okay. You know, and we just start the next day as if nothing had ever happened, or the next class, or the next moment, whatever it may be.
And then Faith and Crystal, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that as well?
Hi there. I think you covered it beautifully. I know we're getting close to the 8 o'clock mark. I just wanted to say that yes, ABA can do great things for behaviors that you want to decrease, that you would like to never see again, and then, you know, behaviors that you would like your child to learn. And it's important to find a balance, you know, and behavior change is a slow process, you know, just like if you're ever learning to do a plank, you know, you don't start out at 5 minutes in the plank position. You do 30 seconds, and the next week you might do a minute. So, you know, it's always important, like when you have these goals, yes, define them, make them important, but just, you know, do little steps, because, you know, I can't hold a plank for more than a minute, full disclosure. And just like, you know, some of our kids, they might not be able to sit in front of the computer for a minute today and 5 minutes tomorrow. They might need to do it more slowly.
I think one of the important things too that a lot of times we forget as professionals and as parents is that they're still kids. They still need to have fun. Learning can be fun. All kids deserve to have fun learning, and all parents deserve to have fun teaching. So, and professionals as well. So it's important to remember that and give them the breaks that they need, and mix up the tasks. Like you could still be doing motor imitation with music videos and stuff, and you're still having them do stuff with you, you know, but it's fun and it's mixing it up. It's getting them to move and get out of their chairs and helping them stay engaged and make it more interesting.
And I do know that there are social skills groups that are running virtually that are actually having a lot of success. So as we're, you know, in this virtual world that we're in, you know, still reach out for those types of supports. Sometimes it can come from a therapy organization like the Theraplay family of companies. Sometimes it could come from an organization like Compass is more focused just on the behavioral therapy. So seek those out if you feel that that would be helpful for your child as well.
Mhm.
And I'm going to move on. And then Wendy, is there anything else like you'd like to add to this, these talking points?
Just a couple of things is as well, you know, we've all talked about creating that learning space, but maybe creating a little sensory space or movement space could also be really helpful. Another thing I just wanted to mention about the learning space is they have these amazing standing desks now. So sometimes it might even be helpful to stand and learn. I know my son, he hasn't been diagnosed with ADHD, well, this one. And so, but he likes to move. And in the classroom, you can move, but on Zoom, like the teacher was like, you're moving too much, I'm getting vertigo. So we put a background on and put my son in a different seat. And now it's not quite as distracting to the teacher or anyone else. So I think we talked about a lot of these things. The only other thing that I would mention is that there are, because there's more opportunities to be together, and if you're co-isolating with neighbors, that can build social skills. You might be able to do virtual OT in groups that way, you know, where if your child's playing with a neighbor, you know, they bring them in, or there's opportunities around mealtime to build in the teaching of executive functioning by helping them, you know, get the ingredients with you, you know, start to cook, set the table. So there are opportunities that maybe we didn't have before. So, and I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, just I always think, you know, there's not a mind or a minute to waste. So there are always ways to think out of the box, to overcome challenges and live our best lives.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone. We truly appreciate this. I understand that there's a problem. Oh, okay. So we were having a problem with questions coming up, but we actually have a question now. Here, the first question is, for a child that has to wear a mask all day and refuses to talk with it on, what strategies can I do to help?
I can speak to it.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So, I actually did, that kind of reminds me, because I really didn't speak to the panels as a speech therapist. So, I certainly think for a child, and having the different panels with the mask on is a great thing for the child. I know for us, we have chosen not to use them in therapy, but we actually have face shields and actually tabletop shields to use in therapy, so that they don't even just need to see a small portion of our mouth, but can see the whole mouth. So we kind of pull down our mask for a little bit to model what we need to, and for the child to see it, and then we pull the mask back up. There was some concern with fogging, and that they were fogging the faces, and then it wasn't helpful anyways. But for the child that won't speak with it on, I would honestly take the approach kind of like a sensory approach, kind of gradually work with the child to work with that mask to be on. I would also look at, Dr. Ross kind of talked about, won't the child talk because it is too tight against their mouth? Or, you know, I know for me, some masks I put on, my lips are touching the front of the mask, and it just feels weird and uncomfortable for me as an adult. So look at the type of mask that you have for your child. Is it too snug that their lips are touching the front of that mask? I know they actually do have like plastic pieces that you can order on Amazon that actually just make the mask pop out a little bit, so that it's not flat against your face. It's just like a plastic insert you put in whatever type of mask that you have. So that's something to look into for it. And I would also just start that gradual process of working that tolerance. You know, again, working 5 minutes, having a short conversation, seeing how your child tolerated with the mask, and then asking them if they can express it. What feels uncomfortable for you talking with that mask on? And then try to problem solve as far as what is happening with that mask on. It is certainly different. I know sometimes that air coming back in your face is also very different, and that also can be a sensory response, so that when they are talking a lot, they're getting hot. I know me, I get hot in my mask too, and the more I talk, the more hot I get. So just looking at those things and trying to gradually build up those positive successes of having the mask on, and then work with the therapist as well to kind of express what the child is saying about why the mask is uncomfortable when they talk. Dr. Ross, do you have anything else?
No, I mean, I think those were great suggestions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another question that I can actually address. What about the use of music or art experiences? Do you also provide access to music therapy services? And speaking from the TheraPlay family of companies, we do not provide music or art therapy, but we have sought out and do work closely with those services in the communities that we serve. At the end of the month, we are actually going to be doing a webinar specifically focused on physical, occupational, speech, feeding, music, and art therapies with organizations in Eastern PA. But with our sister companies in Western PA and in Virginia, we all are working with partners in the community. So if you're in one of those areas, you can certainly reach out to us and we can connect you with those types of services. And then the next question I have is, Dr. Ross mentioned food. How do we keep someone from boredom eating?
I have to be honest, I think that's really hard. I have a hard time with that myself. I don't know, do you guys have any ideas for that?
I mean, the one thing that I find, like the schedule, like knowing, okay, between this time and this time you can have breakfast, and really trying to keep it so that they're obviously not starving if they're bored eating, and if they want to bored eat, well, what is it, a healthy snack? Like, what are the options? And I think changing up some of the options also helps. So if at 3:30 they're saying they're starving, but they just had a snack at 2 o'clock, okay, well, you can then choose to have carrot sticks, a yogurt, or a little bit of, pretzels, like something a little bit more crunchy to also give them that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's not cookies, it's not ice cream, it's not ice pops that parents would be like, okay, I really don't want to give them this. But also, I mean, it would be no different if they were getting off the bus after school. They would probably have a snack around that time. So kind of thinking through, like you were saying, Dr. Ross, like keeping that typical schedule, because that is what their body is ultimately used to. I know we've lived this new norm for a while, but I think kind of setting it out there and almost retraining their brain, no, I don't need to eat every time I'm bored. Or, oh, okay, well, go do this and then we can talk about a snack. Kind of also like redirecting and giving them other options to do. But I think the healthy snack options are usually the best bet, because they're like, I don't want that, forget it, I'm going to go do this.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did also were some of the snacks, like sometimes it's like if you see it, you're like, oh, I'm just going to take one.
Mm-hmm.
Things we made sure were just out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and then, to your point, the healthier things were the things in sight, and they tend to be less, boredom eating.
And the other thing that I know I've seen work is like pre-packaged. So if at the beginning of the week, packaging up, okay, here's your allotted like pretzels, or in these containers, like here's what a typical portion of this snack would look like, and having them readily available. Okay, it's snack time, you can go pick out one of those, versus again, just having that, all right, I want Doritos and I'm going to pour a whole big thing into an oversized popcorn bowl. Nope, here's my Ziploc bag with this, that's my snack, I know what and they'll start to learn what makes them feel full, because having those healthy snacks are what's going to fill them up and make them not hungry, versus eating empty, chips and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I was going to suggest is water. So making sure you have water available, because water actually fills us up, and they may not want to eat when they're drinking more water. So as they're on the computer with school, having water available. I know for us, just a simple thing, we always like ice cold water. So we got a portable ice maker, and it's convenient for us to get ice, and we drink more water because we have ice available. Just something simple like that you can just make it a little bit more readily available, and have that water, which might fill their bellies up a little bit more, and they might not want to boredom eat that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are great ideas.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, I want to, first of all, a couple of housekeeping things. Remind everyone that we do have the handouts, which If you're looking for Act 48 credits, we have the paperwork and the handouts, and then we also have the social stories that Dr. Ross was referencing. Please take the time to fill out our survey and let us know what other topics that you would like to see more information on so that we can put those types of things together. We have several more webinars coming up over the next several months with topics that we've heard from families that they'd like more information on. And then also, Dr. Ross had mentioned the Jefferson's website has a ton of resources to reach out to for additional information, ideas, supports. And then the TheraPlay family of companies. So in Eastern PA and New Jersey and Delaware, it's actually TheraPlay that has outpatient facilities and a website and a Facebook page and Instagram. But in Western PA, we have Positive Steps Therapy, which also has those same resources. And in Virginia, we have Fleming Therapy and the Children's Therapy Centers, which also we all have websites, we have Facebook pages, we have Instagram. We're posting ideas of things to do with your kids. I mentioned we have yoga videos, we have scavenger hunts out in the driveway, all those types of ideas that you can actually, if you log into those or look us up on YouTube, you'll be able to see those types of things. So there's a lot of resources out there that we want to be able to make sure that we're helping you with. I really want to thank everyone on our panel of experts tonight for your time and dedication. First of all, for what you do every day, but also for taking the time tonight. Dr. Ross, we really appreciate your support with this and your support in the community. And Katie, Courtney, Gabby, thank you, co-workers, for what you do every day. And then Faith and Crystal, thank you in Virginia for coming to support us with your expertise as well. So thanks to everyone. We're really—
Lori, can I just add 2 quick things really quickly? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I just want to also give families a heads up that hopefully in the near future we'll be sort of asking input from TheraPlay patients and also therapists in terms of some of our community projects. So I hope you'll be on the lookout for that and consider participating. And also this past weekend we had an international symposium on the built environment for autism and neurodiversity, and it had architects and designers as well as clinicians and individuals on the spectrum from all over the world, and recordings of that will be available soon. And it was kind of cool to hear the architects get involved, because sometimes it is the built environment that makes the difference. So you can be on the lookout for that. And I just want to thank all of you. I always learn so much from all of the TheraPlay teams for involving me. I used to bring my own son to TheraPlay for OT, so I'm a huge fan. And thank you for having me.
Well, and thank you. Thank you. And I used to bring my son to Dr. Ross to help figure out what his challenges were. So, but we know these are tough times, and we're truly wishing you all success as you navigate this school world and this school year in this new world. And again, please let us know other topics. We'd love to bring more information to you to help. So everyone, have a great night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.